I am Elise Parker, 27 years old, and I never thought I would stand at the centre of my family's biggest scandal. When my grandmother Evelyn passed away, I guessed the reading of the will would be awkward, but I could not imagine what happened after that. My family lives in Pacific Heights on a slope that looks out over the San Francisco Bay. The house is a modern block of glass and steel with doors that open by codes, warm floor lighting and floor-to-ceiling windows, where you can see the shimmering streaks of water in the distance. From the outside, the Parkers seem to have everything. My father, Mark Parker, arrives 5 minutes early. Shirts crisp, words to the point. My mother Kate is polished in both her dress and her greeting. They are a new power couple in smart home tech, Parker Home, co-founded by my dad and run by my mum. Install systems that make a house take care of itself. Lights turn on when someone walks in, doors lock. When you leave, the temperature stays steady, everything is controlled on a phone. But the real wealth did not come from small stakes or scattered investments. It came from Parker Home itself. From an experimental switch panel in the garage years ago, my parents expanded into smart locks and thermostats, then won installation contracts for large houses around the Bay Area. By the time I was old enough to remember, the company's service vans lined the curb in front of our house every morning. Since I was little, I knew I was different. At dinner, they talked about rollout schedules, costs, and timelines. I talked about first light and the faces I saw through a lens. Dad said effort is good, but it has to be useful. Mum asked, "When will there be a customer?" I still went to school every day, but my mind was on photography. I liked standing at Fort Point in the pale early hour, waiting for the bridge to glow after the fog. My sister Lauren is the perfect heir of the Parkers boarding school, a top university and MBA back at the company, very early now in charge of operations in the local papers for process optimization and fast growth. Her engagement to Nora Brooks, an in-house lawyer in tech, was mentioned in the business pages. The photos of the two of them with my parents looked very proper. I did not take that path. I worked as a studio assistant, took a few small paid shoots, and spent most of the rest of my time chasing the frames I believed were worth keeping. Grandmother Evelyn was the only one who did not push me to change course. She spent most of her life taking pictures and often called me late at night to ask what I had seen that day. As her health weakened, I visited more. She would hold my hand and say that as long as I stood firm in what I believed, she would take care of the rest. Then, last month, she went in her sleep. Tomorrow morning at 10:00, the whole family will be at the trustee's office in the financial district to hear the will. I thought it would be a session of reading names, dividing papers and going home. But tonight, when Mom put it on the calendar and Dad said, "Be on time, no surprises," I understood this was not just a formality. In that glass and steel house, Lauren was always praised for delivering fast, clear results, and I was asked whether what I did was useful. We grew up in the same house, looked at the same view, but went in two different directions. She followed a path already lit, and I took a path that needs more time to see clearly. And tomorrow, in a high-rise conference room with thick glass doors, they will say plainly which path counts as right. The sentence, "Tomorrow morning, in that glass room, they will say clearly which path counts as right," followed me the whole way back to Dogpatch. I put my bag down, laid out the papers, the invitation, a pen, my grandmother's camera, and taped a note by the door with 3 short lines: "Be on time, stay calm, bring what matters." My phone buzzed. An email from my mother, subject line, "1-line bio from you." The message was short and crisp like an office memo. "You should drop the Parker name in your artist introduction to avoid the public mistaking a connection to Parker Home. This is a family matter. You should keep it separate." I pictured my name in my head, cut down to just Elise, then shut the laptop. I understood this was not only about a surname. They wanted to remove me from anything that could be seen as representing the family in their way. I picked up a pen and added another line to the note on the door, "Bring my full name." I remembered my second year in college when I was 19 and said I wanted to take photography seriously. Dad folded his hands and said I should study something useful with clear hours. Mum smoothed the tablecloth and reminded me that people look at our family first before they listen to us speak. The next semester, they cut some of their support. I knew if I didn't manage myself, I would have to stop halfway, so I applied for scholarships early, increased my credits to stay eligible, and took evening shifts at a cafe to pay for rent and small expenses. The first night, I locked up the cafe close to midnight. Grandma called. She didn't ask how much I made or whether I was tired. She asked what I had seen on the way home, then told me slow and steady, keep your hands firm, breathe before you press the shutter, and remember, discipline comes before inspiration, because in any meeting, discipline is the first voice heard. A year later, at Thanksgiving dinner, Lauren shared that the company had just secured 2 new housing developments for the coming year, worth over $1.5 million, part of a client line she had built years earlier. Mum smiled before Lauren even finished. Dad nodded, and the sound of forks on plates was neat and precise. When it was my turn, I said a small gallery had set a date to review my portfolio the next week. The table fell quiet for a few seconds. Mum asked when they would buy. I answered that they had to see the work first. Dad closed the matter. Effort is good, but it has to be useful. A month later, a cafe on Mission Street bought my first photo set for a total of $320. I slipped the envelope into my coat as if it might shatter if I held it too hard. When Dad found out, he looked at me for a beat longer than usual, then said, "You should see the bigger picture. The $1.5 million contract your sister just secured, that is the value this family is aiming for." He didn't need a harsh tone. The words alone kept me silent the whole way home. Days like that made me realize I was standing on 2 different edges of the same table. But there were still moments that made me believe I was not lost. A cafe hung my photos. A customer brushed a hand lightly across the one near the door and smiled, not knowing I was standing behind them. The room shifted for a brief moment, not loud, but enough to keep me going. Tonight, I slipped the invitation into the outer pocket of my bag so I wouldn't fumble at the reception desk. I tried on the black dress Mum would call appropriate. I set my alarm early because being late would only give them one more reason to criticize. Before turning off the light, I read the lines on the door again, pressed the paper flat with my palm, and touched the worn strap of the camera like a small farewell. I don't know in what order the names will be read tomorrow, nor do I fully understand what no surprises means. But I do know what I will carry into that room at 10 o'clock, and I will walk in with my full name. I will walk in there with my full name, and thinking of that brought back my last days with Grandma as clear as a morning without fog. In the sunroom of the house on the slope, she wrapped a thin wool scarf around her shoulders, motioned for me to sit, then took from the drawer a small key tied with a worn silver ribbon. She placed it in my hand and said calmly, as if reading an agenda, "After I'm gone, open the second drawer on the left. Not before, not after." I nodded, feeling the cold metal in my palm mixed with the scent of jasmine tea in the air. The noon she passed away, the phone rang while I was rinsing a cup in the sink. The nurse's voice said she had gone peacefully. I dropped into a chair water, spilling over my hand, my throat burning as if I had swallowed smoke. I cried so long I needed a tissue once then, twice, then a third time. Between sobs, I thought of the night she called, just to ask what did you see today, of her steady hand on the armrest of jasmine tea, and of the pen stroke she laid down sharp and final across a page. When the tears slowed, I took my coat and went out. That afternoon, I returned to the sunroom, opened the drawer exactly as she told me, and found a red folder labelled in her handwriting with 4 words, "Keep in place." I didn't rush to read. I only glanced at the neat title pages, the dates written in blue ink, then closed it, slipped it into my bag, and understood that keep in place was not about the cabinet. A few weeks earlier, she had told me to set up a small camera on a tripod frame her chair and stand behind the lens. "Leave it like that," she said when I finished speaking. "Turn it off." The red light came on. She looked straight ahead, her voice steady. "Our name is not only on the products it is in, how we look at the world," she went on. "I chose Elise because she sees to the end without leaving halfway." She sipped her tea, set the cup down gently, then pressed each word. "The parts meant for Elise will be read separately. Anyone with questions, see this tape." She nodded like a chairwoman closing a session. I turned the camera off and sealed the memory card in a small envelope as she had told me. Her funeral was as orderly as everything she arranged. Many came and went, each saying the familiar words of respect. I stood at the back looking at the empty armchair in the sunroom, and the teacup no longer warm. My heart felt hollow like a wall, where a frame had just been taken down, the pale outline still there, but the centre gone. The night before the meeting, Mom called me home for dinner. The table was covered in a white cloth, knives and forks lined straight. Lauren reported next week's rollout. Mom praised her at once. I said I would go early tomorrow to avoid traffic. Mom nodded. She placed a printed sheet in front of me. "If you must speak, say only this. Safe lines, smooth, revealing nothing beyond thanks." Dad set down another paper, a seating chart with my name in bold on the outer row near the window, and his mum's and Lauren's names in the middle row aligned with the moderator's table. "Follow this tomorrow," he said low but firm. I folded the sheet, left it on the table and carried my plate to the kitchen. Passing the hallway, I heard Dad lean toward Mom and murmur, "As long as everything stays in order, there will be no surprises." I stopped a moment, looked at my grandparents' wedding photo on the wall, then moved on. That night back in Dogpatch, I added another line to the note on my door, "Carry my full name, remember," firmly. This morning I woke when the sky was still grey, ate a slice of bread, touched my grandmother's camera. Like a greeting, slipped the red folder into my bag and caught the train earlier than usual. Downtown was still cool, the glass of the towers not yet hot to the touch. I passed, the guard saw Parker on the registration board. The elevator rose quickly and stopped softly on the 17th floor. The hallway was as quiet as a reading room. Mom, Dad and Lauren were already there, sitting upright on the long seat by the window. Nora stood beside my sister whispering. Mom looked me over from head to toe, then nodded as if checking off something put in its place. At the conference table, a grey-haired man was arranging papers into a black folder. He looked up, greeted us, and asked if we were complete. I pulled out the chair in the outer row, just as on the chart, set the camera on my lap, and felt the worn strap brush against my wrist. The clock on the wall showed 9:59. As the second hand neared 12, my grandmother's words from the sunroom returned. "The parts meant for Elise will be read separately." And I knew the session about to open was not just a formality. When the second hand struck 12, Alan Rivera pushed the glass door wider, inviting each of us inside, his voice steady, even like the hum of the air conditioning above. Light from the 3 glass walls fell across the long table, breaking into narrow bands on the black folder before him. As I stepped through the doorway, Dad touched the back of my chair, pulled it half a step back, then angled it slightly toward the window. "For balance," he said, as if by chance. Mom set a stack of papers in the centre of the table, running her finger along each edge to square them. Lauren sat exactly aligned with the moderator's table, back straight hair, tied neat, while Nora stood just behind her shoulder, murmuring about next week's rollout schedule, as though we were in a company meeting, not here for a will reading. I slid my chair into the place Dad had arranged, set the camera on my lap, the worn strap brushing my wrist like a small reminder. Alan sat at the head of the table, opened the black folder, confirmed the time and procedure, then said we would begin. He read the first formalities, a few gifts to long-time employees, a small donation to the community fund Grandma often supported. The room kept its even breath. Then he turned a page, paused a beat, and in the same flat but clear voice said, "The portion for Lauren Parker." He read the figure slowly, letting every syllable settle $20 million to be used for the expansion and continuation of Parker Home, under the full discretion of the recipient. Mum exhaled as though completing a difficult sentence, her hand resting for a brief moment on Lauren's shoulder before pulling back her nail-brushing fabric with a faint sound. Dad gave the smallest nod, eyes lit half a shade brighter, almost invisible unless you looked straight at him. Lauren whispered, "Thank you." Her lips pressed, then parted the expression. I knew well her way of containing joy without showing too much. Nora did not smile. She only noted short words into her pad. No one clapped, but the air in the room shifted like a draft in a long hallway. Alan turned another page, his eyes flicking toward a bold line. My heartbeat stuttered, and Elise Dad spoke before Alan could open his mouth, his voice dropping into the tone of an internal memo. There is only a letter. No monetary allocation. He kept his eyes fixed on the black folder, as though helping the lawyer save time. Mom added gentle but firm, "This is the moment to learn responsibility, my dear." Lauren pinched the edge of the paper before her until it bent faintly. Nora glanced up at me, then lowered her eyes again. I heard the air system steady overhead, the scrape of a pen across paper, then silence. Same surname, but here each name was measured in numbers. I swallowed, throat suddenly dry, my hand resting on the camera so I wouldn't raise it to my face. Dad slid my chair half an inch closer to the window, as though opening the aisle. "For space," he murmured. Alan didn't move at once. He set down his pen, looked around the table, then said, "Excuse me, there is one more portion concerning Ms. Elise Parker. This section will be read separately under written and recorded instruction from Mrs. Evelyn." Dad frowned. "We are her direct family. Elise's matters are family matters." Mum folded her hands across her chest, her smile polished but without warmth. "In this family, nothing is separate." Alan shook his head, his tone unchanged. "This procedure was signed by Mrs. Evelyn and recorded on video. It cannot be altered. I must ask everyone else to step outside for a few minutes." Nora parted her lips as if to speak, then stopped looking to Lauren. My sister tilted her head, asking if they should wait right outside the hall. Alan nodded. "Please." Dad held my gaze for one long second, his eyes like the added notch of distance between our chairs. I looked straight back at him and said nothing. No one slammed a hand on the table, no one raised a voice. Only small gestures and the distance marked on the floor. Mum stood first, smoothing her jacket, gathering the stack of papers into her bag, as if she didn't want to leave a trace. Lauren set her pen neatly down, folded the page in front of her and carried it with her. Dad left last, pausing half a beat beside me, speaking low enough that no one outside could hear Elise. "You have the chance to do the right thing for yourself." I turned my head just slightly, then nodded instead of answering. The glass door closed behind them with a soft click, not even a draft, but the room instantly felt wider. Alan slid the lock into place from the inside, a simple motion, but one that showed he was used to keeping order in rooms like this. He gestured for me to sit more comfortably if I wished. I pulled my chair straight again, no longer angled toward the window. He set aside the black folder and drew from his case a red file. I recognized it at once, the label written in her hand, the strip of tape a little crooked on the lower edge. He placed it in front of me but did not open it. "Before we begin, I want to make 2 things clear," he said. "First, every instruction related to your portion was signed and recorded by Mrs. Evelyn herself. Second, if your family intends to challenge our organisation, has sufficient grounds to protect her wishes." I nodded, my eyes still on the red file. In my mind, the sunroom rose again, the chair, the scent of jasmine tea, the way she set her hand on the armrest, like driving a nail deep enough that a picture would never fall. Alan opened the black folder, pulled out a thin envelope, and set it beside the red file. "This is a copy of the letter addressed to you. We will read it later. For now, I just need to confirm a few details." He checked my ID matched the name on his list, then switched on a small screen at the head of the table. He pressed a button, and the frame I had once set up appeared Grandma in her familiar chair teacup, at her right-hand light streaming through a thin curtain. She looked straight ahead and said, "Our name is not only on the products, but also in how we see the world. I chose Elise because she looks all the way through, never leaving halfway." Her voice sounded older than on the day I filmed, but still firm. All other thoughts in my head stepped back, leaving only the weight of her words dropping steady, one after another. Alan paused the video just before the final line. He turned to me and asked, "Are you ready?" I drew in a breath, glanced through the frosted glass, where the outlines of my family blurred into the long hallway, then looked back and pulled the red file toward me. My hand steadier now. "I'm ready," I said. He nodded, a very thin smile, born of office habit rather than warmth, and said, "Then let us begin your portion." As the door closed, the room seemed to widen by a breath. Alan slid the black folder aside and placed before me a thin envelope, and the red file, its handwritten label, and slightly crooked strip of tape exactly like her habit. He gave a small nod. I opened the envelope first. The paper was thick, the blue ink leaning rightward just as every time she signed. "Elise, people will talk about you in numbers. I see you by what you dare to see through to the end. Our family built its name from things people use every day. You preserve the moments they often overlook. These two are not opposed. If one day someone makes you choose between fast and right, you choose right. If they tell you to be silent, to keep the peace, you stand firm. Trust comes before money. Money will follow when you finish the work fully. The portion for you is not to seek anyone's permission. It is a space for you to do the right thing under your own name. And remember, your photographs must carry other people's stories into the light, so that kindness can be seen, so the community has more courage to live well together. I hand you the wheel and the reason to steer. I love you." By the time I reached that line, my throat burned as if I had swallowed dry air. My eyes blurred before I could blink. A drop fell onto the page, spreading the blue ink into a darker mark. I tilted the letter so the words wouldn't smear, then dabbed it gently with the back of my hand. The tears kept falling quiet steady like fine rain on glass. With each drop that touched the paper, her word "stand firm" sounded louder in my mind. I laid the letter beside the camera, pressing my palm on it to steady my breath. Alan switched on a small screen at the head of the table. The frame appeared the sunroom, thin curtains teacup to the right. She looked directly into the lens I had once set her voice warm and firm. "Our name lives in how we do each small thing. Elise works to the end and keeps trust before money. Her portion must support more than one person each year, open doors to women entering photography after age 35, because they are too often pushed outside the frame. Reports must be public. Dedicate licensing revenue to sustain a fund for true stories, so good things have more ways to travel." She gave a small nod, like closing an item on an agenda. Alan turned the screen off. No ornament, no flourish, only a way of living, spoken in the voice of someone who had seen the road long and clear. He drew the red file closer, opened the first page and pointed to the neatly written table of contents. "These are the items Mrs. Evelyn left for you," he said slowly. 1. A rare photography collection she spent most of her life gathering prints, gifted, traded, or found, kept as memory together with full licensing rights. The collection has been insured and appraised with an estimated value of about $25 million. I pictured boxes of negatives labelled in her handwriting reels. She filmed at the ferry docks and small workshops, things my sister could never close with a single call. 2. A 3-story building in the Mission District, designated for photography, dedicated to your craft. The ground floor is a gallery, the second a studio and darkroom the third, an apartment with a completed archival preservation system. Estimated value about $10 million. This is not just property, it is a stage with lights already on. I saw it clearly, brick walls, light streaming from tall windows, the faint chemical scent still in the darkroom. 3, an initial operating fund meant to let you work without having to choose between paying rent and pursuing a project that needs more time. The fund carries requirements of transparency and moderation, in line with the principles she set for the company. I nodded slightly, remembering the nights of counting pay from late shifts and cutting rolls of film to save costs. 4, the social condition tied to the craft, an annual residency program for 4 women photographers at the age often forgotten with a built-in mentor network and distribution channels. A portion of licensing revenue will return to the True Images Fund so that stories can travel farther, books exhibitions, even community screenings. He looked up. All of this is held in a structure managed by an independent organisation. Your family cannot interfere with your professional decisions. This mechanism ensures you keep the steering wheel your grandmother handed to you. He closed the table of contents and left the red file at the centre of the table. No number was spoken here yet. I felt the weight of the items, a world with doors already open, a stream of rights that could outlast cash, letters of interest from museums tucked in some folder, an exhibition calendar already waiting for its audience. I understood this was not simply more in value. It was deeper in life, a chain of opportunities, a network autonomy and a reason for my craft that money alone could never buy. Alan asked softly, "Would you like to invite your family in now, or after we finish reading the details?" I glanced through the frosted glass. 3 silhouettes stood in the hallway, like a photograph already framed. In my mind, the last line of the letter was still warm. "I love you," I said now. They are waiting for their line. I will speak mine. Alan nodded, pressed the call button. While waiting, he placed a copy of the letter into the black folder and folded the screen away. I rested my hand on the red file. The paper felt cool beneath my palm, yet it had grown warm. The sound of shoes echoed closer. The door handle turned and Dad stepped in first, his eyes sweeping the table as if to check order. Mum followed coat crisp. Lauren brushed the back of her chair lightly before sitting exactly on her axis. Alan said simply, "We continue. The next section sets out the structure and conditions tied to Ms. Elise's items." I nodded. The worn strap of the camera brushed my wrist like a small anchor. The letter, in blue ink, lay beside it, the tear stain dried into a darker line, plain to see where I stood. I kept my back straight, ready to hear everything that belonged to me, and to speak in the exact language my grandmother had taught. Alan nodded, recorded it into the minutes, and stated that from this point, my portion would be read in front of the family, exactly as signed and recorded on video. He laid 3 sealed stamped items on the table, an appraisal envelope with a bold blue insurance seal, a large printed floor plan of the 3-story building with arrows marking guest flow, and a disbursement schedule neatly crossed through each quarter. "These are already in effect," he said, briefly tapping his pen on the ground floor, marked in red gallery, then circling the arrow up to the 2nd floor darkroom, and cold storage, and finally the 3rd floor apartment. I looked at the seals and dates on the schedule, like watching the heartbeat of a machine already set in motion. Dad's jaw tightened, the bone along his cheek flickering. Mum leaned forward, measuring the seals with her eyes. Lauren followed Alan's pen across the plan, as if watching a presentation slide. Dad leaned in, voice low but urgent. "The family is the keeper of the Parker name. If you open a space on your own, the press will think our family is divided. Therefore, the family should also be named to protect the image." Mum shifted into PR language. "Hang a plaque that says, Parker Annex on the door, merge the press release trim. Your artist bio, it will all be easier to manage." Lauren was more pragmatic. The family has museum contacts and sponsors. If you want access, let them advise the exhibition schedule and approve content first. When I did not nod, they turned to risk photography can draw controversy. Let the family lawyers review it first for safety. Then to debt. All the years of paying tuition for the children, the clear suggestion that any success of mine was partially theirs. Finally came the soft but sharp blow. If you keep this separate, the family will be forced to create distance publicly, and if necessary, pursue legal review. All of it was spoken gently, as if for my good, but each line clicked a latch, asking for a co-manager's seat, to put their hand on the switch, pressing me to wear the Parker name like a sticker, building a gate at the start of every project, trading moral debt for control, threatening to exhaust me until I opened the door myself. I listened to each lock slide into place and kept silent. Alan pressed a button on the conference phone. A green light blinked and a woman's voice came clear and firm through the speaker. The legal representative of the managing entity reminds all parties of the non-interference clause. Any attempt to unjustifiably intervene in this structure will trigger restrictions on future entitlements of the intervening party. All changes must be approved by the independent board. Dad froze for half a second, as if hearing something not in the language of our family living room. Mum adjusted the edge of her scarf. Lauren gripped the corner of her paper lightly to keep steady. For the first time, Nora spoke, her voice low but sharp. A lawsuit means opening the records to the public. The non-interference clause will lock out all future benefits. My advice is, don't go down that road. Alan pulled out a slim folder. And here is supplementary evidence Mrs. Evelyn, through 3 different entities over the years, purchased a branch of photographs taken by Ms. Elise herself. He flipped quickly through invoices' dates spread across years, each with clear blue seals, the intermediaries' names printed at the top. Mum's eyes fixed hard on the seals, her lips pressed into a thin line. Dad turned to me but said nothing. Lauren scanned each date the way you study a road already paved. I touched the worn strap of my camera to steady my hand, remembering the cold mornings by the bay, how all this time someone had been standing on the other side of my frame. Dad tried another angle, if not full co-management. Then, at least the residency program and exhibition schedule should go through the company's advisors. Mum cut in, insisting on a secondary sign, Parker Annex, to make the press easier to handle, then looked straight at me, her voice shutting like a freezer door. If you insist on keeping everything apart from the Parker family, then you also cut yourself apart from this family. Don't expect our name to stand beside yours on any paper. Don't use this house's address for contact. Don't mention us in acknowledgements. On holidays, don't come home. In family photos, there will be no space for someone who chooses to stand alone. From today, what you do is yours. Don't drag the Parker name in to fix it. And if trouble comes, don't call me. You've chosen your road, so walk it fully. As for us, we'll act as if it has nothing to do with us. Do you understand, Elise? The room fell silent as if the air had been drained out. I spoke slowly so my words would not blur into anyone else's. I do not measure success by how many logos stand next to my name. My success is doing the right work, bringing more people into the frame, and reporting with transparency. I will stand firm. Alan opened a small ledger. Artistic rights belong to Ms. Elise, content curator's schedule. She may hire her own team. Placing signs or renaming is not permitted unless approved by the independent board. Disbursement schedule is fixed. Reports must be public each quarter. Any change must go through the proper channel, not through the family table. He pushed toward me a sealed nylon pouch with keys, a handover checklist and an access card. Thursday morning, collect the keys, review utilities and security with the technicians. In the afternoon, sign the handover report for the photo archive. Next week, open the operating account and meet with the management unit to finalise the first quarter plan. Dad spoke low but hard. This isn't over, Elise. Outsiders won't understand. Mum's eyes flicked to the keys. The press will ask why you separated. Lauren chose the softer line. If you need process support, tell me. I didn't reply. I set my palm on the building plan. For a moment, felt the paper's cool flatness beneath my skin, then took the keys. The metal pieces touched with the faintest sound. In that small sound, I heard again the scent of jasmine tea, the blue ink, and her last words, I love you. I said, I will follow the schedule, and rose just enough for the chair to give a small scrape, not to startle anyone, but so I could hear myself. When we stepped into the hallway, the elevator chimed a clear ting. I knew then the next step would not be on anyone's lips anymore, but waiting behind a lock for me to open. The elevator doors closed. The hallway gave back the steady hum of the air system. Alan said he would meet me at the building. I walked down to the parking lot, the keys clinking in my palm like a pulse. By noon, I had signed my name 3 times on the handover record, swiped the card once, heard the crisp click of the lock, then photographed the building plan, and sent it to the trustee's office as required. It took no more than 10 minutes. I did a quick circuit to check lights, water, and locks, then stood at the glass door, thinking of her words. Just open it. The light will do the rest. My phone rang. Dad. His voice was soft as if he hadn't threatened me. Just that morning, he offered to put his name on the evening press release, saying the family would stand with me to avoid talk. I thanked him and declined telling him. All communication would go through the trustees' channel. He paused, then left me with one reminder. The press doesn't like silence. Before I could pocket the phone, Mum's text arrived. She sent the name of a reporter experienced with community pieces, suggesting I pitch a behind-the-scenes story to keep it light. I didn't answer. By late afternoon, Lauren's email came short, and sharp, CCing Nora and the trustee, an urgent request for a safety review of the assets, citing a humidity incident during a recent handover they had heard about. I checked the logs. There had been no alerts when I received the keys, but the wording was vague enough to raise doubt. Alan called his tone calm. He told me to stay with protocol. The trustee would respond in writing by tomorrow. I nodded, attached a photo of the control panel from that morning, and closed the message. Not even an hour later, Tom reported someone at reception, claiming to be a technician from the old vendor, saying he'd heard I was new, and offering to check the dehumidifier only 10 minutes. I told Tom to hold him there, then called Alan. Alan's reply was firm only through trustee scheduling no unscheduled visits. I went down. A man in a faded logo jacket and a cap tool bag in hand smiled easily. He said waiting for procedure would take too long, that he could just take a quick look for peace of mind. I thanked him and refused to ask for a card. He hesitated, then tore a scrap of paper, wrote a phone number, no name. I sealed the scrap in an envelope, asked Tom to sign across the flap, with the time noted just to mark it. When the glass door closed behind the man, I heard Alan's footsteps on the steps outside. He glanced at the envelope in my hand and gave the smallest nod. By evening, the first headline was up in the local press source, close to the family. Parker granddaughter takes $1 million photo archive lacks proper safeguards. The subline mentioned the family's concern and urged that the assets be returned to a safe home. I finished reading, set the phone down on the table, poured myself a glass of water, and sat facing the wooden chest marked with her name. In my mind, I pinned the day's events, as if onto a corkboard, the call to put his name on the press release as a way to plant a foot inside, the leaked article sowing doubt, the urgent review email setting up a ready-made gate, the helpful technician who appeared to take a quick look, all in a single day of receiving the keys. I called Alan back, asked him to send the official maintenance team first thing tomorrow, and told Tom to tape a clear note on the archive door. Do not open unless trustee technicians are present. I also messaged June one short line. You said the light is good at 4 p.m. Can you come? She answered with one word. Yes. Later that evening, Lauren sent me a separate message, not CCing anyone. I don't want to see your name tangled in that mess of bad press. Just do the right thing. I replied, Thank you. You're welcome to come tomorrow if you'd like, but all professional matters will go through June's schedule. That message drew no reply. Close to 9, an email arrived from a city no-reply account an inspector would visit, unannounced tomorrow morning following an anonymous report of unsafe operation at a new storage facility. The appointment was set right between the 2 slots I had just confirmed with the maintenance team. I printed the email, slipped it into a red folder, locked the drawer, then stood at the glass door looking out at the street. The streetlights spread a thin yellow band across the sidewalk. Wind from the bay stirred the paper sign on the door, so it trembled faintly. I touched the keys in my pocket, thought of what my mother had said that morning, and understood the gap they feared was not emptiness, but the space where their hands could not reach. I turned off the lights, pulled the door shut, and heard the lock snap clean. Tomorrow morning, someone would knock in the name of safety, and I would open, but not for anyone to step into what does not belong to them. In the morning, I opened the door on time. The city inspector stood waiting with a thin folder and an unhurried gaze. I led him straight to the second floor. The cold storage room still carried last night's note, Do not open unless trustee technicians are present. Tom brought up the monitoring screen, the green dots steady like a row of trees. As I explained the procedure, the wall alarm gave one short cry and fell silent. The screen blinked yellow for a second. I shut the storage door with a single count, read the time aloud, asked Tom to log it, then called the maintenance team I had scheduled. The inspector said nothing, only wrote notes, his eyes on me as though waiting to see if I would choose fast or choose right. The technicians arrived 10 minutes early, their uniforms marked with the company name ID badges clear. They unsealed the gasket in front of us, laying 2 strips on the table, one frayed and uneven the other. Knew the smell of rubber still sharp. The technician pointed at the fine scratch, speaking gently, as if afraid to crack glass. A slip of a millimetre lets in moisture, especially if the door stays open long. They replaced the filter and the gasket photographed the serial, stamped the date. I put the old gasket into a zip bag, labelled it with the hour, showed it to the inspector. He nodded, asked for a copy of the photos, then signed off. Before leaving, he gave one final line just loud enough. As long as you follow your manual, we have no reason to fine you. I walked him all the way down. Bay wind funneled through the corridor, cool as water. At noon, Alan arrived. Together, we printed the morning logs, sealed them, and pulled the hallway camera footage from last night. On screen, the helpful visitor's jacket showed clearly the logo of a vendor that once worked for Parker Home. Tom froze jaw tight, then fetched the logbook to add a line about the unannounced visit. My phone buzzed an email from the insurer. If another irregular alert occurred within 7 days, they would freeze transport of the collection until an independent audit cleared it. I read it slowly 3 times, then forwarded it to Alan and Tom with one line only: hold the doors, hold the protocol. That afternoon, right at 4 June, Whitman appeared in a grey scarf. She didn't look at the screens first. She stepped into the darkroom, held her palms out to the light spilling through the curtain's edge as if testing the rhythm of breath. I recounted the morning briefly. She listened, then said only, "You chose right instead of fast. Keep at it." We walked once through the gallery on the ground floor. She touched the wooden chest with the brass plate engraved Evelyn Parker and told me to place it where everyone entering must see it, not to boast, but to remind. On the way to the door, June stopped at the glass panel and asked if I had read the noon news. I said yes. Another article had repeated the source close to the family line and added details about the risk of an insurance freeze. June gave a thin smile and said, "Then let them see the process themselves. Invite the city reporters, to look with their own eyes, so silence is no longer an empty space filled by rumour. I nodded, texted Alan to arrange a short site visit for the local press 2 days later, with June standing beside me to explain. Late afternoon, Hal dropped by with 2 coffees, setting one on the desk without a word, his eyes falling on the zip bag I had just labelled. I told him that tonight I would reorganise the files by colour blue for logs, red for maintenance, yellow for expert notes, grey for Grandma's documents. Hal nodded, then added one line reminding me to tie my laces before running. Don't let a loose screw become a story, make it into evidence. That evening, Tom messaged me a photo of the control panel fully checked. I put my phone down, looked through the glass. The street was lit, the glow spread across the pavement like salt. I sat at the desk, printed the logs, underlined the exact time of the alarm, clipped it with the maintenance team's report, and felt the building begin to breathe evenly. I was about to shut the computer when the legal notice flashed up. Nora, on behalf of the family, had filed for a temporary injunction to freeze operations, citing inexperience of the new owner, risk of damage and brand confusion. The court set an emergency hearing for the very week of the opening. I stared at the words on the screen, hearing something small drop inside me like a grain of sand. I called Alan. He told me to sleep well, that tomorrow we would answer with documents, and tonight I should lock the door as usual. I switched off the lights, pulled the door shut, heard the lock click clean. On the way home, I texted June 3 words: meet at court. She replied at once, bring your light. I kept my pace by doing each step the right way. The next morning, I turned on the computer, reprinted all the humidity logs showing they were stable, and sent them to Alan with a photo of the fire alarm seal that had been replaced last night. 5 minutes later, he replied with an email, CCing the whole family, reminding them of the non-interference clause, and stating clearly that any baseless interference would automatically lock the intervening party's future entitlements. In less than half an hour, Parker Home put out a statement on a news site. The tone sounded like it honoured her legacy, but it slipped in the line, we are concerned about safety standards at Elise Parker's new facility. My name sat there without needing an exclamation point. One of her former donors texted to postpone because they needed more time to evaluate. I did not argue. I sent the link to the public manual for the preservation protocol I had just built. Check times, dual signatures, equipment photos, all shown by date. At noon, 2 city reporters arrived on time. Tom stood by the control panel and read the numbers. June explained why the storage door opens only 10 seconds and why right before fast is not negotiable. I walked them past the wooden chest, engraved with Evelyn's name, and said, the opening stays on schedule. If anyone still doubts, please come see with your own eyes. One pressed me. Are you sure you have enough experience to hold a photo archive worth tens of millions? I did not look away from the clock. Experience is something that adds up. Standards are something you choose on day one. The afternoon article was fairly written, they described each step. But the comments were pulled toward Parker Home's release, and the phrase lacking safety standards repeated like a splinter. Alan forwarded the court's email and emergency hearing at 9:00 a.m. on Friday, the very day I opened that evening. He told me to keep the schedule and prepare 4 folders, blue for logs, red for maintenance and supplies, yellow for June's expert notes, grey for Grandma's documents and the video. Hal brought a stack of old letters and printouts of emails between her and the museum. From years ago, the creased edges proving this project was not a whim. I clipped them into the grey folder, like setting another brick. In the afternoon, Mark called, I don't want this to go to court. Let Parker Home stand with your name. I'll withdraw the filing and shut down the press. I looked at my reflection in the glass, with the sealed boxes behind me. I'm not changing the name. I'm only changing how people can see the protocol. The other end went silent, then cut off. Right after that, Alan sent a short letter to Mark, Kate, and Lauren. He restated the non-interference clause, attached the court timetable, and quoted her words about the beneficiary's artistic autonomy. His last line was like a ruler: all exchanges go through the trustee. That evening, Tom reported a call asking to borrow our fire escape plan and maximum occupancy. He had refused and logged the unknown number. I told him to forward it to Alan, and at the same time requested that we replace the secondary fire alarm box lock with a model that uses a lead seal for inspection, with photos of the seal taken before and after. Thursday morning, we tested the backup generator, cutting the power for 3 seconds, exactly as written in her manual. The lights came back steady, and June simply said, "Enough." I updated the public manual with a new entry power test and added time-stamped photos. By noon, a sharp-edged editorial appeared: "Who will be responsible if one lapse in standards ruins history? I did not respond." June sent me just one word stand. Hal forwarded me an audio file of a call between a contractor and a number tied to Lighthouse Ops LLC, the entity that liaises with my family. A woman's voice asked them to let the humidity drift above threshold for a few hours, just to have a safety pretext. I sent the file to Alan. He drafted a formal statement certifying the data chain and prepared to submit it to the court. By evening, the insurer repeated their warning: another irregular alert within 7 days, and they would freeze transport. I replied with the latest log, a photo of the newly sealed fire alarm box, and noted that on opening night, an extra guard would be stationed at the back stairwell. Before locking up, I walked the stairwell, once paused at the new alarm box, and photographed the lead seal up close with the date and time. I saved it into the red folder, the act feeling like I had lit a blind corner. An email from the court came through, clearly 9:00 a.m. Tomorrow, judge's name location. A note, technical record prioritized. One more donor said they would come see with their own eyes before deciding. And then a nameless text lit up: "See you tomorrow night." I slipped the phone into my pocket. The keys clinked once against each other. Across the street, a billboard flickered like a heartbeat. "Morning is court. Evening is guests." I turned off the lights, pulled the door closed. The lock clicked clean, leaving me with the quiet building waiting to be opened at the exact time. That evening, I opened the doors at exactly 6:00. The brass plate with her name sat on the first wall. The lights were even. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the dry scent of photo paper. June stood beside me checking the list. Tom test-pressed the fire alarm in test mode. The lead seal was intact. The new guard was seated at the foot of the back stairs. Hal took a spot near the entrance. Alan walked one round to review the safety signage. I touched the backup generator for a second, like touching a promise, then nodded to start welcoming guests. People flowed in a low hum of voices. A few city reporters stood taking notes. I saw Lauren in the doorway. She looked in hesitant. I nodded hello. She nodded back and stayed at the edge. I led a small group past the Dawn at the Pier series. I was answering a question about film and light when the lights flickered once, then steadied at once. Almost in the same moment, the fire alarm shrieked from the back stairwell. A ripple of people turned a few quick breaths. The guard ran. Tom called over the radio for everyone to stay calm. I hit the switch to back up power. The lights held as if they had never wavered. Hal pointed to the security monitor at the reception desk. On the small screen, a man in a baseball cap had just yanked the backstair alarm pull. His hand still rested on the handle. The fresh lead seal hung skewed at one corner. The guard sprinted and subdued him cleanly. At the same time, another man stepped straight toward me, voice louder than the last ring of the alarm, demanding I take down a portrait for invasion of privacy. He pulled out a faint, nameless printout, waving it high for everyone to see. I did not move from my spot. I signalled to Tom to silence the alarm after confirming there was no smoke. Then, I drew the thick folder I had set ready at the desk, flipped to the page with the subject's name, and presented the consent form with clear date and ID number, right beside the provenance sheet for the photograph. Hal stood by, verifying each page. June said loud enough for the cluster of reporters. Consent records and provenance are the spine of an honest exhibition. Tonight, you are watching that spine in motion. The man with the fake paper faltered eyes darting. The second guard invited him to a side room for verification. Just then, the reporters' phones chimed one sharp click. A new article had gone live. Source claims gallery used unlicensed images. I told them, please step closer. Look at the files, then write. Tonight, we're opening every drawer literally. A woman reporter, bent to inspect the date stamp on the consent form, nodded and pointed her camera at the folder instead of my face. Behind us, the guard walked the alarm puller to the desk. Tom brought up the hallway camera again and zoomed to the 1712 timestamp. On the jacket, a faint logo showed from an old vendor. I snapped a quick photo of the screen with my phone and sent it to Alan and to the precinct, already aware of the cold storage incident. Hal called the duty line, said briefly, "The guy from the other night just pulled the alarm." The crowd slowly returned to the rhythm of looking at photos. I turned to guide an older couple, pointing them to the series my grandmother had taken on the coast many years ago. June stood before that image and said, "Light but clear. Here we choose right before fast, and tonight, right has beaten fast." A few people clapped. The ringing still in our ears was covered by the sound of hands meeting. I noticed Lauren closer now, her eyes no longer doubtful, as at the doorway. Passing me, she murmured, "I didn't know anything about these tricks." I didn't answer, only said, "Look at the photos. Leave the rest for the police." Less than 10 minutes later, the precinct officers arrived. They reviewed the cameras, photographed the pulled seal, took the cap as evidence, logged the report, and asked Tom about the stranger who had posed as a technician days earlier. Tom handed over the logbook, steady-voiced, nothing added or taken away. Alan submitted printed power logs and the pre-opening seal photos. The officer nodded, said the case would go to an investigator, then looked at me. "You keep going. If we need you, we'll call." I thanked him, drew a long breath, and returned to the guests. By 8:30, the gallery was full again. I heard soft background music, saw the lights run smooth like drawn lines. June stood with a group of young people answering their questions about light. Hal laughed with someone in front of the Harbour series. Alan leaned on the desk, scanning the guest list. The guard at the stairwell stood calm as a period at the end of a sentence. Passing the brass plate with her name, I whispered, "Grandma, I've kept it, just as you told me." My phone buzzed a message from the trustee's lawyer. 9 a.m. "Tomorrow, do not change schedule, open doors as usual, files are ready." I replied, "Understood." One of the reporters returned to thank me for letting them review the records, saying they would update their piece tonight. I only smiled, not asking for favour, because everything was already on paper. Near closing, Lauren came to the guest book. She signed her name, hesitated, then added one short line. I glimpsed, "Good luck." I nodded, not holding her back. Tonight wasn't for explanations. Tonight was for the light standing steady after 2 alarms. When the last guest left, Tom and the guard counted together, photographed the sealed alarm, again logged the closing hour. June pulled her scarf tighter and said, "See you at court tomorrow." Hal placed a hand on my shoulder. "Tonight, you took back the room." Alan gathered the folders, handed me a checklist of what to file in the morning. I took it locked. The door heard the familiar small click. Outside, the yellow streetlight stretched even across the road. I slipped the keys into my pocket, walked toward the parking lot, my mind on the courtroom at 9 a.m, and the colour-coded binders already stacked. In my chest, I knew if another blow came, it would only land against pages stamped with date and time. The next morning, I arrived at court early, carrying the 4 colour-coded folders, repeating one simple line in my head, "Keep the standard and tell the truth." The courtroom was small, white lights overhead, wooden benches creaking. On the other side sat my father, mother, Lauren and Nora. Mother stared straight ahead as if posing for a passport photo. Father bent over his phone. Lauren met my eyes for a second, then looked away. The judge entered, struck the gavel once, and calmly invited the plaintiff's side. Nora stood speaking slowly, and clearly she requested a temporary freeze on the studio's operations, arguing that the new owner lacked experience, that there had already been a storage incident, risks of irreparable damage, and concerns about brand confusion. The judge asked for evidence. Nora submitted a news article about the fire alarm, a screenshot of a social media comment, and a clip from a visitor's video the night before. He nodded once, then turned to us. The trustee's lawyer stood up, said little, and placed the green folder on the podium. Inside, 3 days of humidity logs, measured 3 times a day, co-signed by me and Tom, plus a screenshot of the alarm timestamp from yesterday morning. The red folder, an official maintenance report, photos of the old gasket misaligned, and the new one installed with a note, explaining how being off by a millimetre could trigger a humidity spike. The yellow folder, a 1-page statement from June on safety procedures, and the decision to delay film intake until conditions were correct. The grey folder, Evelyn's written directive on the heir's artistic independence, along with a short video where she explained why she chose me, choose right before fast. The judge reviewed them in order face unreadable, then asked for witnesses. Tom took the stand calmly, describing the stranger who posed as a technician, the misaligned gasket, the camera footage of the man pulling the alarm. A local police officer added briefly they had detained the man, and on his phone was a text reading courtesy inspection and an invoice paid by a company called Lighthouse Ops. The room stirred. The judge asked who Lighthouse was. Our lawyer requested to submit an ownership record and slowly read the name of the ultimate beneficiary, Kate Parker. I heard an intake of breath from the back row. My father turned to look at my mother. Lauren turned fully toward her, as if realizing she no longer knew where she was sitting. Nora objected ownership links did not equal direct orders. Our lawyer continued submitting an audio file with verified chain of custody from the contractor. He pressed play, and a woman's voice filled the room, clear enough to freeze my spine. Just let the humidity spike for a few hours. We need a safety reason to stop this. It was my mother's voice. The room fell silent as if air had been sucked out. The judge asked Mrs. Kate if she had anything to say. She stood gripping her bag strap, voice dry as paper. She only wanted everything to be safe. She hadn't thought. He cut her off. Safety is not creating danger and then calling it safety. The trustee's lawyer presented one last document, a precautionary letter from Evelyn, signed by her own hand with 2 independent witnesses and video confirmation. The clause stated clearly that any relative who interfered against her wishes would lose all future benefits after her death, and that portion would go to the real-life photo fund. The judge read each word slowly, then looked up and asked the plaintiffs if they had already been reminded of the non-dispute clause. Nora answered quietly, yes. He pulled the stack of papers toward himself and said the court recognised that Elise had closed the vault. When humidity shifted, had not brought in film had called. Independent maintenance had full consent forms and provenance records, and had camera footage showing sabotage. The request to freeze operations was denied. The court warned that if interference continued, it would consider penalties under the non-dispute clause and obstruction rules. The costs of this hearing would be borne by the plaintiffs. The gavel struck again, the sound of wood echoing in my chest, like a lock snapping shut. In the back row, someone dropped a pen cap with a sharp click. My father was still seated, but his shoulders slumped as if a support had just been pulled away. My mother stared straight ahead, but her eyes were unfocused. Lauren turned fully toward me, her lips shaping, I didn't know then, silence. I stood, thanked the judge, thanked June, Tom, and the police. Alan touched my arm lightly and said, "Let's go. Tonight still awaits." Out in the hallway, the air was cooler. Hal handed me a paper cup of water, saying softly, "You just put everything in the right place. The rest, let the photographs speak." My phone buzzed in my hand. It was an email from the City Museum. They wanted to meet to plan a special feature on Evelyn's archive and a separate chapter for my own work. I read the last line they wanted to see the files early next week. I lifted my head to the light, pouring through the glass doors, thought of the bronze plaque with her name set on the first wall, and knew the ending of this story would no longer be shouting matches, but a quiet room opening on time. 1 year after the night of the fire alarm, and the morning in court, I opened the studio doors at 10 a.m, same as every day. Sunlight slid across the new bronze plaque at the entrance engraved Elise Parker, and stretched into a thin line on the wooden floor. June arrived early. Her grey scarf draped neatly, walked one round through the gallery and gave a short nod. Enough? Tom placed the humidity logs on the counter, each row of numbers straight, no skips. He still had the habit of tapping the backup generator lightly before leaving, like greeting an old friend. Hal came in with 2 paper cups of coffee, set one in front of me and said nothing more. Since that day, he had always been present at moments when a nod was better than a speech. On the second floor, the first 4 women of the residency program were pinning contact sheets to the wall, a retired high school teacher from Richmond, a night shift nurse from San Mateo, a seamstress from the Tenderloin, and a single mother from Bayview. They debated the afternoon window light as if everything were just beginning, and it was. The Real Life Photo Fund had just sent out its first round of support, a small grant for a community photo class at a neighbourhood library, another to buy a film scanner for a youth arts centre. I signed those invoices faster than any press contract I used to, because they went to the right place. The City Museum confirmed its schedule to take samples. The fall exhibition about Evelyn's archive was set with one small room reserved for the series I had shot along the bay. June said it would be placed at the end, so viewers would walk through Evelyn's story before meeting my answer to it. At noon, Lauren came by unannounced, no reporters, just a white envelope in her hand. She walked quietly through the rooms twice, then stopped at a resident artist's photo of a hand resting on an old-school notebook. She decided to buy it, saying she would hang it in her office. Before leaving, she wrote one small line in the guest book. Choose, right before fast. No signature, but I recognised her handwriting. By evening, an email dropped into my inbox, only 4 words. Congratulations, Dad Mark. I read it, didn't reply right away, just moved it into a new folder I named Keep, because some bridges should be left to dry on their own. My mother didn't send a message, and her silence no longer felt like an open wound. It was like a blank space on a map. You walk around it and continue on. That night, we added another small plaque below Evelyn's Real Life Photo Fund, 4 women each year. The silver letters shone under the lights like a promise carved in metal. Guests began arriving. Some brought their children, an elderly couple held hands. A group of students lingered before Evelyn's old cameras in a glass case. I heard her words again in my head, let the light do its work. In the days of court, I learned to file records by colour. Now I sought life by steady rhythms. Check the vault in the morning. Answer, grant emails at noon. Work in the dark room in the afternoon. Stand at the door each evening at opening time. No fire alarms, no smear articles, just people standing quietly before a photograph longer than they would on a screen, then leaning to whisper something to the person beside them. At closing, I locked the door, the click still neat as on the first day. Standing in the empty hall, I looked at the bronze plaque and Evelyn's portrait by the sea at the stairwell, and whispered, I've kept it, as you asked, kept the standard to share the chance. My phone buzzed a photo from the community class. The whole group, smiling wide, captioned the new scanner works. I smiled, set the phone down, turned off the lights. One by one, went upstairs and opened the window to the bay breeze. If anyone once said passion can't support anyone, maybe they hadn't seen a room lit on time, a fund reaching the right hands, and a person standing long enough before a picture to realise they still have something to tell. I drew the curtains, sat at my desk, opened my notebook, and wrote one line like a reminder to myself right before fast. The rest, let the light speak.